If you want to watch exclusive Naruto Lemon, then you should go to my boosty, which is in the description under the video. What will happen if the quarrelsome girl, always going ahead, finally breaking free from everyone's hatred and contempt, returns to the very beginning? What will happen if this girl's best friend, sealed within her since birth, also returns with her? Chapters 35 to 38. Enjoy watching. Chapter 35, Pendants. Naruto watched without much enthusiasm as the last of the genin received numbers from the examiners and took their places, trying to decide for themselves what strategy to choose for their team. On the one hand, with joint efforts they could easily answer all, even the most tricky questions in this test, and quietly and peacefully pass the first stage of the exam. Although they could cope with this task alone, because each of her teammates could solve all these tasks themselves. Whatever one may say, Sakura, who crammed textbooks to the core and wrote down the lectures of Irika and other sensei, as well as Sasuke, word for word, having been trained since childhood in all the intricacies of shinobi work under the strict guidance of his father and brother, had to crack them like seeds. Naruto, unlike last time, through the efforts of Kakashi, his friends from the past future, and with the tailed fox in his head, who, having lived for hundreds of years, was a walking encyclopedia in itself, knew almost more than the examiners themselves. Therefore this important test did not frighten her at all. But, in her personal opinion, based on bitter experience, in such conditions the opportunity to talk with her teammates in their case served not as theoretical help, but as moral support. After all, this stage was not aimed at their knowledge or abilities, but at the ability to withstand psychological pressure from professionals and obtaining information. Marino was a difficult jonin, Naruto knew this firsthand. The man was a true sadist when it came to extracting information from captured shinobi. He respected pain, believing that only after experiencing it, a person will tell the pure truth. But like people, torture came in different forms. Some simply did not perceive physical pain, ready to endure anything just to preserve the secrets of their village. Then Ibiki used another, more sophisticated and scary tactic. This man masterfully escalated the atmosphere, while putting pressure on the most painful points of the interrogated, forcing him to tell him absolutely everything. He was rightfully considered the best in his field. However, as time has shown, this did not deprive Marino of common sense and a good heart. On the other hand, it was simply a great opportunity for Team Number 7 to stand out from all this gray mass of newcomers. Surprise everyone and at the same time get on the nerves of the too serious and formidable Ibiki. After all, this whole farce, proudly called the first stage of the chunin exam, was designed for stupid children, whom Naru, thanks to the attitude of those around her, the departure of Sasuke, the death of Jiraiya and the war against Madara and Kagaya, ceased to be in her past life. Now the kunoichi perfectly saw all those insignificant gestures, actions and words that made the exam participants at a subconscious level develop a panicky fear of this test and its consequences. Knowledge force. And this force could now play well on the side of their team. As soon as the blonde hinted to her teammates what the whole point of this stage was, and the terrible test would immediately turn into a game for them. Naruto knew this for sure, because last time, being literally on the verge of panic, but having gathered herself towards the end of the time allotted to the genin, she, casting aside the fear that had gripped her whole body in a vice, passed the first stage of this damn exam, without answering a single one. From the test questions, indirectly violating one of Ibiki's own rules. And now Team Number 7 could follow the same path, playing the roles of those who truly have nerves of steel, radically changing the situation. After all, from being interrogated, they will turn into guards in the blink of an eye. But each of these options had their downsides. Firstly, none of them were protected from cheating. And Naruto had no intention of allowing other genin to go through this stage at their expense. Secondly, the girl was not 100% sure that she would be able to clearly convey to her teammates the reason why they should not answer the questions from the test. She couldn't say that she had already taken it once. There was, of course, an option with papers left on Minato's desk. But even here there were obvious inconsistencies, because it was unlikely that something like, even if they don't answer a single question, they will withstand the pressure, could have been written there they will pass. And thirdly, Naru was not sure that Marino would not find fault with her and her empty piece of paper this time. Yet then, in childhood, she not only blew the minds of the entire interrogation and torture department, but also hit the Jonin's self-esteem hard. How is it that in less than an hour the child forced an experienced shinobi from another village, who had been enduring interrogations from professionals for several days now, not only to split, but also to escape from her to prison, having handcuffed himself beforehand? However, Naruto did not know whether he would do this or not, because his contradictory nature still confused her. The one who mercilessly broke his will, regardless of gender and age, so easily agreed to Karen's conditions, food and acceptable conditions in exchange for information. But in his place, Naru would definitely find fault. Hey, stop racking your brains, Hibiki is already finishing explaining the rules of this damn exam. The Kunoichi Kurama said mockingly in his head, drawing the blonde's attention to the man who was telling something at the blackboard with a stern look. Inhaling noisily, Naru briefly turned around, looking for her teammates, who, by the will of fate, ended up in different corners of the classroom. Sasuke was, as always in public, collected and cold. But Naruto, over many years of communication with members of the Uchiha clan and her best friend in particular, has long learned to distinguish the emotions that barely appear on the faces of the Uchihas. So, the guy was noticeably excited about what was happening, which also did not add to her joy. Sakura looked like a confused and even frightened child, especially when she tried to object to Marino. She, like many others, clearly did not realize that banning questions was also a way of applying pressure from the examiners. Damn it, Kurama, what should we choose? Turning back to Hibiki, who was saying something about the rules at the board, the girl literally howled to herself. Outwardly, she still continued to smile impudently, looking confidently at the Jounin, stoically enduring Haruno's menacing and indignant glances, literally boring into the back of her head. And the last rule, Ibiki's stern, impassive, terribly frightening voice echoed throughout the audience, literally for a moment tearing the girl away from her internal torment, on a subconscious level forcing her to listen to Marino's words. Why are you so worried? The Nine-Tails snorted mockingly from the prompter booth at her words, once again not understanding Naruto's torment. Without realizing it, although this was a rather controversial fact, thereby diffusing the atmosphere and distracting the blonde from the awe that gripped her on a subconscious level in front of Hibiki. Just write this test in the last 5 to 10 minutes, business. He laughed, once again helping his Jinchuriki with a difficult choice, which only she considered to be so. However, what was to happen next was incredibly fun for the tailed one, because immediately after the completion of this stage the second was supposed to begin, promising him just a lot of fun and another portion of freedom. And you can look impudent and get on your nerves without empty pieces of paper. The tailed one grinned sarcastically, clearly hinting that the blonde was once again being driven over mere trifles. However, the kunoichi, captured by the words of her bijou, did not notice the mockery in his words, well, or pretended not to notice. Completely immersed in the proposal of the Nine-Tails, she was already thinking about how best to present this proposal to her teammates. Thank you, Kurama. Finally coming to some conclusion, the kunoichi sang joyfully, at the same moment meeting her triumphant gaze with Hibiki, who was just explaining how exactly one can fail at the first stage of the exam. The man smiled strangely, studying her jubilant gaze and turned away, again starting to write something on the board. Under the approving chuckles of the nine-tailed kunoichi, she tilted her head to the side, shrugged her shoulders, sincerely not understanding Marino's actions, and leaned back in her chair, completely concentrating on her teammates. Or rather, on small seals applied to small wooden pendants that she gave them right before the start of the exam. This was Naruto's first attempt at creating similar seals not applied to paper, and the girl very much hoped that they would all work as they should, because she never decided to test them on her father or her beloved, wanting to keep it a secret until the last stage exam. The kunoichi wanted to surprise everyone. She wanted to receive recognition from Minato, Kakashi, Sasuke, Sakura, Itachi, Shursui. In general, from everyone who knew her well. And it doesn't matter that in this life she was already a genius. It doesn't matter that for her father, her beloved, her best friend, and everyone else, her well-being was more important than her strength and capabilities. Naruto wanted to prove to everyone that she was worthy of being a shinobi, the daughter of the fourth Hokage, the heroine of the upcoming war, Kakashi's wife and the future Kage. It was that same, hidden thing that never changed in her character in all the 2 lives she lived. The kunoichi wanted this recognition too much in the past, as a lonely girl abandoned by everyone, to let go of these desires so easily. Somewhere on the border of her sensations, 2 seals loomed, responding to the call of their creator with barely noticeable flashes of her chakra invested in them. They pulsed intermittently, completely ready to be used for their intended purpose, causing an almost imperceptible, satisfied smile on the girl's lips. "Welcome, welcome! How can you hear me?" she said to herself, for the first time addressing someone other than Kurama in this way, and somewhere behind she heard a surprised, purely Uchiha grunt and a loud "Oh!" uttered by the voice of Sakura, who in the blink of an eye attracted all eyes. All but 3: Naruto, who knows the reason perfectly well, Sasuke, who guesses about it, and surprisingly Ibiki, who glares at the excited genin with an unreadable gaze. Naruto's head immediately exploded with Kurama's laughs, and the girl herself, however, as always, with the last of her strength she restrained the hysterical laughter stuck in her throat. "Quiet, everyone!" Marino said dryly, when the noise due to the exclamation of Haruno, who was blushing like a tomato, turned from whispers into outright laughter, which immediately disappeared after his words. He once again looked around the audience with a stern look, focusing especially on the pink-haired girl, and standing at the teacher's table, folded his arms over his chest, becoming many times more serious and frightening. "Severe!" the tailed one drawled approvingly, but was immediately interrupted by the quiet, nervous hiss of his Jinchuriki, listening to his teammates. However, this is understandable. It was extremely difficult to mentally talk with him and these 2, given the fact that these 2 conversations had to be separated and isolated from each other, in order to avoid unnecessary questions and problems. Therefore, with an understanding snort, Kurama silently retreated to the depths of her subconscious, preparing for a free performance. "Hey, concentrate on those pendants I gave you and speak in your mind." Meanwhile, the blonde said, explaining exactly how her gifts work, nodding gratefully at the words of her tailed friend. "So, the exam will last exactly an hour," Marino snapped at the same time, returning the atmosphere, destroyed by the prank of a girl from the team of the Hokage's daughter, to the direction he needed. Oppressive, tense silence. "And narrate?" With slight interruptions in surprise, which was not at all typical of the Uchihas, Sasuke's voice sounded in the blonde's head, causing her to smile contentedly. "Like this?" Sakura squealed more clearly than the guy, a couple of seconds later, causing the kunoichi to wince for a moment from her friend's high, loud voice. "Let's start!" Almost in unison with Haruno, Ibiki said loudly, looking at the hastily moving genin. It was only when his eyes fell on Naruto that he frowned slightly. The girl, contrary to the atmosphere, was absolutely calm. She sat relaxed on a chair, leaning back and smiling, looking off into space, seemingly not even noticing the general tension, the excited genin around her, and his stern gaze on her. "This is one of the Maelstrom clan's few Injutsu seals, my dear friends." As a matter of course, the blonde explained to her teammates. "But that's not about that now. I have an interesting proposal regarding this test," she said solemnly, luring Sasuke and Sakura into her game. Shikaku and Nara slowly walked along the long corridor in the Hokage residence to the office of the head of their village, who was once again shirking his direct duties. Occasionally yawning, he lazily moved his legs, wanting at that moment more than anything in the world to fall into a warm bed and, hugging his beloved wife to him, fall asleep for about 5 days. But he was still extremely far from fulfilling this desire. For, in addition to the order from his immediate superiors to inform him about the results of the first stage of the chunin exam, the Hokage's personal assistant still had a whole mountain of paperwork waiting for him after the meeting with the Kazekage. Which Hiruzen, replacing his successor as Kage, with a slight smile transferred to him as Minato's right hand. Actually, this meeting itself, which seemed to carry nothing particularly important except another quarrel, resulted in something extremely interesting. Raza, who hates Konoha with all his heart, declared his desire to create an alliance with the Hidden Leaf Village and the Country of Fire as a whole. He so fiercely and passionately convinced the Third and the Elders of the advantages of this alliance that Shikaku became uncomfortable with the dissonance with the Kazekage whom he saw at the last meeting of the 5 Kage. This greatly alarmed the head of the Nara clan, who always thought through everything several steps ahead. He simply could not believe that the one who grimaced at the mere mention of Konoha would so suddenly desire a truce with it. However, there was still a scandal, but unlike what happened last time at the meeting in the Country of Iron, everything ended, instead of a banal fight that the Raikage stopped, with ordinary handshakes. Yawning deliciously once again, Shikaku turned down the last flight of stairs to the door he needed and froze, collecting his thoughts. Whatever one may say, the man did not want to say anything about going to the Hokage with a report on the last meeting and news about his daughter and her team passing the first stage of the exam. After all, everything that he had to tell the Hokage could be called good news with a big stretch. Just look at the news about a possible truce with Suna, who was clearly up to something. However, the news that his daughter would enter the Forest of Death today interrupted even this. What about Minato? Shikaku himself was slightly uneasy from the realization that his only heir would poke his head into this place, teeming with carnivorous creatures, which even Jonins could not cope with at times. This is not to mention the presence of enemies around, trying to stick you kunai in the back. Yawning again, the head of the Nara clan slowly moved forward, imagining in advance how his superiors would react to all this, and with each step he slowed down more and more, because in anger, the seemingly harmless and kind blonde was scary. Hokage-sa. Having knocked and carefully walked inside, the man spoke, but stopped short when he saw, in his opinion, the most surreal picture. Minato, in a crumpled and wrinkled Hokage cloak, sat on the floor, hugging Kakashi's shoulder, and with unfocused eyes looked at his assistant, who interrupted his story. The copy ninja himself looked no better than his sensei in open jonin vest, a slipped forehead protector that barely covers the other eye, and a heavily twisted mask. Finished the role of the former captain of an elite shinobi squad ANBU, periodic hiccups. Well? The blonde drunkenly stretched out, showing him with jerky movements with his free hand to continue, allowing Shikaku to finally understand the reason for such strong changes in the behavior of the always collected and serious shinobi. These two were simply completely drunk. The Kazekage retired to his assigned house some time ago, the man reported, noticing slight displeasure in Minato's gaze. Still, he saw the Hokage in such a state for the first time in his life, which means he could easily run into a reprimand, which, naturally, would result in punishment for Shikaku in the form of another additional job. He desperately didn't want to work even more, so at the last meeting, he proposed concluding a friendly alliance with Konoha. The brunette blurted out in one breath, out of the corner of his eyes noticing several empty wine bottles on the floor, table, and near the men. And judging by the missing labels, this was no ordinary wine. The Third obtained this drink of unknown origin only in moments of crisis or great happiness. The head of the Nara clan knew this from the stories of his father, who, like him now, served as the personal assistant to the Hokage. What does this freak think he is? Minato blurted out angrily in response, abruptly losing all of his relatively complacent state, and tried to rise to his feet. I tried. Because, tangled in my cloak, I couldn't do it, remaining sitting on the floor. What the hell is a truce after what he told me in the land of iron? Yes, him. The blonde continued to be indignant, looking more and more like a stubborn, angry child with every word. However, he was not a child, and this meant that it was better to urgently transfer the topic in order to avoid another conflict between the two Kage. Shikaku understood this better than anyone, because the Raikage, alas, was not here to separate them. Hokage-sama, that's not all, the head of the Nara clan quickly said, mentally preparing for the worst, because the next news was even worse. The first stage of the chunin exam is over, 26 teams have passed, the brunette said quickly and clearly, noticing how Minato suddenly fell silent and stood up, looking at him demandingly, waiting for him to continue. Even Kakashi, who had previously been in some strange stupor, looked at him questioningly with a black eye cloudy due to alcohol. Your daughter's team, like all the teams from her graduation, passed with the best recommendations from Ibiki Marino, he said, expecting anything from tears to anger from the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. But the blonde's reaction was surprising, because it turned out to be completely different. He smiled widely with his usual, friendly and warm fatherly smile, and, again placing his hand on Hataki's shoulder, grinned at something. I told you, Kakashi, my girl will pass this exam with ease. He laughed, and fumbling for the bottle with his other hand, took several sips straight from his throat. Yes, I had no doubt about it, Minato-sensei. The copy ninja responded in a slurred tone. It's just Guy. Naru, she's SOSO. No, it's clear, of course, that it's better this way. But I'm her. Gradually turning to Lamentations, he finished lamely. Minato looked at him strangely, questioningly or something, and silently handed him the bottle. However, Shikaku suddenly also became interested in what Kakashi meant, not to mention the desire to look at Hataki's face, which he hid from absolutely everyone in the village. The man nodded gratefully and, taking the bottle, sighed heavily, in no hurry to repeat the blonde's action. Either not wanting to drink, although it was more about his mask, in front of a stranger, or he simply thought that he had had enough. The second stage of the exam will begin in half an hour. Anko has already taken the genin to the venue. At his own peril and risk, the head of the Nara clan decided to remind them, already preparing to leave the Hokage's office. After all, I wasn't sure that these two remembered the conditions of this stage. Forest of Death. Minato and Kakashi concluded in unison, exchanging glances. This stage will last 5 days. The blonde drawled somehow thoughtfully, thinking about something. Kakashi, Nara needs to be escorted out. After a couple of seconds he said cheerfully and, looking at the back of the brunette, who had already turned towards the door, he shouted, Shikaku, will you accompany us? Your son also passed the first stage. It's not good to send children to this dangerous place like that. With a confident smile, Naruto scribbled the correct answers to the test questions on her piece of paper at the speed of light, periodically consulting with her teammates who were doing the same. Actually, for the first half hour they really behaved like arrogant, completely self-confident individuals, incredibly unnerving both Ibiki and the rest of the examiners. But the jokes ended as soon as the first 15 teams left the audience, caught cheating. It was at that moment that Sasuke finally noticed that the test was aimed not only at knowledge, composure in stressful situations, but also at the skills of young shinobi. They not only had to be able to do all of the above, but they were also obliged to take advantage of it in such a suffocating atmosphere. By the way, it was created just perfectly. The genin were given a minimum of information, while forbidding them to ask questions. And this naturally led to panic. Because, firstly, it was unclear how many teams would pass, because the presence of a system of points summed up at the end of the exam for each team made it clear that not everyone who was caught cheating would pass. Secondly, no one knew what the 10th question was, which would be asked only 15 minutes before the end of the test. And thirdly, a ban on questions, which limited actions because this was not only a way to obtain information and defuse the situation, but also an excellent opportunity to divert the attention of the examiners. So, 15 minutes before the mysterious 10th question was to be asked, team number 7 decided to start answering the questions already written on the test. And it was not for nothing that it was so late, because about 20 minutes after the start, Sakura fell out for a couple of minutes. At the same time, Naruto felt a surge of Ino's chakra, which, using her clan's technique, occupied her consciousness, wanting to ride off. Needless to say, nothing worked out for her. After that, everyone finally agreed that Nara's idea was worth the candle, and given their connection, there were no problems with the issues that they had discussed in advance. The tension in the last 5 minutes of the exam before the announcement of the 10th question crossed all conceivable and inconceivable boundaries. Not only Naruto, but also her inner demon felt it. Kurama was silent in the girl's mind, but from him one could clearly feel the anticipation that enveloped the girl's entire inner world. In the outside world, chakra was emanating from everywhere, which the genin used in order to have time to write off what they had not decided for themselves and had not had time to spy before that moment. Because of this, several more teams left the audience, unable to cope with all this horror that was pressing on their temples. Even Gaara, surprisingly the blonde, began to act a little rougher. Although, it had to be admitted, all three from the village of Pesca were at their best. Because the fact that Kankuro was able to infiltrate his puppet into the ranks of the examiners was undoubtedly impressive, as was the fact that he was able to take advantage of it. Not to mention Temari, without outside help and despite the irritating factors of answering the test questions. "The time has come," Marino said with a grin a few minutes after Naruto and her team finished answering. "So I announce question number 10. The man said in a tone that sounded like he was going to kill everyone in the room. No, he didn't shout or be rude. His tone was just as even and serious, but despite this, there was literally a threat from him. "But before I ask it, I will introduce a few additional rules," he drawled sternly, pumping up the atmosphere to the limit. Now you could literally cut it with a knife. At the same moment, the door through which Kankuro had previously come out, accompanied by his examiner doll, creaked. Everyone turned around as if on cue. But Marino's chuckle that followed made everyone in the audience, including the chunin monitoring the cheating, flinch. "Just in time," Ibiki said, arousing vague suspicions in the blonde's soul about his knowledge of Karasu. After all, if he found out that this was not a chunin of the Hidden Leaf Village, but a puppet, then Suna's team would not pass. At least Naruto thought so. "I hope your doll helped you." He continued to speak, completely confirming the blonde's fears. "Okay, sit down," he said mockingly. Contrary to the Kunoichi's fears, he released this fact on the brakes, apparently counting it as one remark for which only a point would be deducted. "I explained the rules, and these rules are very strict." No longer smiling, the man said, again lowering the genin into the abyss of panic, from which they got out thanks to Kankuro. "First, you must choose whether you will attempt the 10th question," he said, stunning everyone present. The Ninetales whistled in Nara's head, deciding that since she no longer kept in touch with her teammates, she might as well have some fun. "Choose?" Temari shouted, the first to not withstand the pressure from Marino. "What will happen if we refuse the question?" she asked nervously, standing up slightly from her seat and slamming the desk hard. "It gives." The Ninetales laughed ironically, while Nara simply winced, sincerely believing that she shouldn't have done this, because after uttering this question, the excitement intensified greatly, because most shinobi were interested in the answer as much as Gaara's sister. "If you refuse, your points will be reset." Ibiki grinned at her words, looking around with a satisfied look at the genin frozen in fear, literally killed by this news. However, not everyone was impressed by his words. Naruto Namikaze, Sasuke Uchiha and a girl from their team Sakura Haruno, they were calm and collected, as if nothing unusual was happening now. "That is, you failed," Marino said dryly, thinking that they simply did not understand the essence of his words. However, he only partly thought so, because these three behaved throughout the test as if they were confident in their passing, and this whole exam was just zilch. And the complete lack of reaction on their part completely confirmed his thoughts, completely crowding out all other ideas. "Master." The demon fox in the Kunoichi's head responded to these words knowledgeably, appreciating the game in tone and gaze, which made others feel the hopelessness of the situation. "This is who you should learn to manipulate from. Otherwise, Minato, Jiraiya and Kakashi." He laughed heartily, for the first time in Naruto's memory praising someone in such a way, essentially acknowledging his strength and skill at the highest level. "What?" Simultaneously with the words of the Biju, it was heard from somewhere from the side. "You heard. He refused to take me for an internship in his department." Somewhat agreeing with Kurama's words, the blonde drawled. After all, she was already living a second life, and she should have taken up what the last time, because of her absent-mindedness, frivolity and straightforwardness, she had sent to hell. But Marino was not the person who could help her with this. They were too different to get along as a sensei and a student. "Of course we will solve it," someone barked from behind the girl, accompanied by a restrained but understanding chuckle from the tailed one. At the same time, Naruto felt a faint pulsation of her pendant, responding to the call of Sasuke and Sakura's gifts. This meant that conversations with Kurama about her future should be postponed until later and again concentrated on talking with her teammates. And now one more rule, Marino said, clearly enjoying the contorted faces of the genin. If you try to solve this question and answer incorrectly, you will forever lose the opportunity to participate in the exam. With a grin that would make any maniac, he said. So I'm with you again, my grateful listeners. The blonde responded with a laugh, saying this right after Ibiki, making her phrase sound like a mockery of his words. Somewhere in her inner world, the Nine-Tails laughed. However, she did not hear the laughter, she heard only the echoes of splashes of water and the unbridled fun of the tailed one. Naruto, what the hell is going on? Sakura blurted out in fear, clearly imbued with the words of this terrible man. Although this is exactly what the kunoichi expected. Naru, are you sure we should answer? Sasuke asked in a strange tone right after the girl, this time greatly surprising the blonde with his words. The guy was definitely not afraid of Marino and his rules. It seemed that he was worried not about this damn exam, but about something completely different, detached and ephemeral. This caused somewhere deep in Naruto's heart a strange, completely incomprehensible warmth and a menacing roar from the Nine-Tails, who clearly understood more than she did. Somewhere in the background, Kiba's indignant words were heard, echoing Akamaru's barking and Ibiki's laughter, explaining to him that since this exam was his, he also sets the rules. Everything gonna be alright. The kunoichi shouted confidently and fell silent, not knowing what else she should say. I provided you with an escape route. He grinned at the surprised looks of the genin, and continued speaking as if mocking. Those who are not confident in themselves can refuse the question and try next time, drawled the man, piercing with a curious gaze at the tense shinobi. Ibiki no longer paid attention to Naruto and her team, because he realized that he, apparently, could not break these three. At least not in this way. He perfectly saw all the sore points of these children. So the Hokage's daughter wanted recognition and love, which, according to rumors, was given to her by their mentor and student of her father. The pink-haired kunoichi passionately wanted to tie her teammate to her, and was ready to do anything for this. The Uchiha wanted revenge. This was immediately obvious, because throughout his life Ibiki had looked into the eyes of people just like him many times. But it wasn't his Achilles heel, but the blonde with blue eyes, whose back he was staring at with a concerned look for almost the entire exam. Sasuke himself did not notice how much he valued her, and this frightened him, because it is these feelings that lead people to betrayal and death. So, let's move on to the 10th question, Marino snapped, returning his thoughts to the direction he needed. Whoever decides to refuse, raise your hand, and as soon as your number is written down, you can leave, he said, motioning for his assistants to begin. Less than 5 minutes later, 3 more teams left the audience, deciding that the game was not worth the candle. Those who remained doubted their choice more and more, nervously looking around in anticipation of another surrenderer, this time from their team. Are we going to sit like this? The Nine-Tails, tired of sitting in silence, popped up in the head of his Jinchuriki with a sarcastic remark. Somewhere behind, a couple more people raised their hands, unable to withstand the pressure, and Naru, grinning, finally sat up straight. No, but it's worth waiting another 5 minutes. The girl laughed at his words and, meeting Marino's gaze, depicted something reminiscent of his recent grin. It turned out, as she understood, better than expected, for the man was clearly surprised and grinned promisingly, frightening the kunoichi, who only miraculously saved her face. Seeing this sight, 3 more raised their hands, hastening to get away from this inhospitable place. Following them, 2 more genin could not stand it, receiving a pair of rather strong slaps on the head from the members of their teams on the way out. Well, I'm starting. Looking at this picture, Naruto smiled nervously to himself, still a little afraid of running into Ibiki's anger. The tailed one mockingly patted her, and said ironically, trying to inflame her. The girl, mentally snorting at his words, hesitantly began to raise her hand, as if about to leave the audience, while feeling the surprised glances of her teammates with her skin. But, at the last moment, she sharply lowered her palm onto the table, hitting it with force. "Can't wait!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, jumping to her feet, attracting the attention of the entire audience. "I won't run away!" Bending forward so that her golden hair fell forward, covering her eyes and part of her face, the blonde continued to scream. "I'll try to answer," Naruto already hissed, looking sternly straight into the eyes of the surprised Ibiki, reminiscent of an angry cat at that moment. "And even if I remain a genin forever, I will still become Hokage, so who cares?" Under Kurama's disgusting giggle, Naruto finished, exhaling sharply, noticing how the faces of the shinobi around were transforming, slowly losing their fear and gaining determination. "And I'm not afraid of you," for some reason the girl added, plopping back into her seat with a feeling of accomplishment. "Bravo! It was so eccentric and lively," the tailed fox said, bursting into laughter. "I'm asking for the last time, your future depends on this decision. It's not too late to change your mind," Ibiki said suggestively, just like the girl before, leaning on the table and leaning forward a little, looking intently at the Hokage's daughter. "I don't go back on my words, this is my ninja way." Exactly copying his gaze, the blonde responded to these words to Kurama's approving roar. "Well, good," Marino calmly answered, straightening up and looking around the audience. "So, everyone who remained," the jonin spoke distantly, holding his gaze on the smiling blonde for a split second, and then continued in a solemn tone, "Congratulations, you all passed the first test." "Ta-damn!" Kurama growled, distracting Naruto from further monologue and Ibiki's explanations. "Well, what will we do next? After all, a meeting with that snake Sannin awaits us ahead." Unexpectedly for his Jinchuriki, the fox asked seriously, hinting that it would be nice to once again go through the main stages of their plan. Naruto nodded understandingly and, leaving her body sitting, leaning back in her chair with her bangs covering her eyes, went into her inner world. "Kurama, I decided everything a long time ago. This time Sasuke should not receive Orochimaru's curse seal." As soon as she found herself in her inner world, the girl spoke, knowing in advance what the Nine-Tails would tell her. For some strange reason for Naruto, he believed that having received it, the Uchiha would not only become stronger, but also learn patience and restraint, something that he desperately lacked this time. Perhaps it was due to changed circumstances or Itachi's upbringing, but the current Sasuke was starting up at half speed. Neither Naruto nor Kurama liked this, but they couldn't do anything about it. "Why?" her tenant asked caustically, narrowing his yellow eyes. "Have you really fallen in love with this vile little man again?" He mockingly drawled, and then, to hurt her even more, he added, "What about your poor Kakashi? He just stopped shying away from you." "Stop mocking, fox face!" the adult Kunoichi snapped gloomily, looking sternly at the angry fox. "It's just that if Sasuke receives this seal, then Orochimaru will gain relative power over him, which could end the same way as last time." Having lost all her sternness, she said in such a tone as if she was ready to cry. The Nine-Tails looked at her strangely, realizing that he was going too far, and exposing his tail, lay down himself. He understood what this girl was afraid of, because Sasuke, besides himself and Kakashi, was the closest person to her from a past life. Yes, undoubtedly, the girl had a father in this life, and a couple more close friends, but this did not make the Uchiha occupy any less place in her. Incarnations of Indra and Azura, they were destined to be close to each other, but because of this same fate, they walked on a thin line of hatred. Okay, I understand you, we won't let this damn Uchiha offend us." The Bijou extended his approval. But as for the rest, noticing a grateful look on himself, he said, trying to translate this sugary topic as quickly as possible. "We are no match for Orochimaru, so we can't do it without you, as well as without using all my skills to the fullest, which will make my life very difficult because of your seal." Ruffling her hair, she responded, leaning back on the fox's paw. "Don't drift, there is someone to cover you." The Nine-Tails grinned caustically and, as if listening to something, stretched his lips in a brutal smile. "That crazy woman is coming," he growled, letting his Jinchuriki know that all talk was over. Naruto nodded, jumped to her feet, and walked away from the tailed beast's cage. Kurama, you know, I value you very much. Once behind the bars of the cage, she turned around, said with a slight smile, and evaporated, not listening to the grumbling of her harmful tailed friend. Wish you luck. That's what the blonde heard when she opened her eyes in the classroom where they were taking the first stage of the chunin exam. Actually, Ibiki said this, and he said it in a rather friendly tone. Yes, damn it, good luck. Good luck, the girl shouted, extending her fist forward. At the same moment, the glass of one of the windows shattered, releasing a shadow inside, which, cleverly grouped, landed on the floor, taking on the image of a very impressive woman. Chapter 36. The second stage begins. Naruto stood with a detached look in the crowd of genin literally languishing with curiosity who had passed the first stage of the exam, half listening to their hubbub. Although, this time the general excitement was perfectly understandable, for they stood in front of a high fence, the top of which was decorated with barbed wire, and in front of a small passage there was an impressive sign with an extremely unambiguous inscription. Life-threatening. Do not enter! Beyond the fence, fully confirming this warning in the eyes of casual visitors to this place, towered unusually large trees, whose roots intertwined like huge snakes at their feet, creating impressive hills and ravines on the other side. The space around these trees was literally shrouded in a stuffy and heavy twilight, gradually drowning in the impenetrable darkness of the old dense forest. And from the very depths of this blackness came strange sounds, vaguely reminiscent of those made by angry wild animals. But unlike them, these were many times more furious and dangerous. It seemed that all the inhabitants of this terrible place had long since gone mad, just like their surroundings. All this, together, created an almost tangible oppressive atmosphere, forcing, despite the hot summer day, to become covered in a vile and sticky cold sweat, intuitively fearing this place. However, all this, frightening, surroundings was the merit of the forest of centuries-old trees. After all this darkness and dampness, which contrasted so strongly with the hot sunny weather that lay outside, was involuntarily associated with something suspicious and extremely dangerous. Welcome to the second test site. Anko Mitarashi announced loudly, the curator of the second stage of the chunin exam, turning sharply to the animatedly talking genin. The space around instantly fell into silence, and all the attention of the young shinobi turned to the brunette who had spoken. A short and slender, but at the same time curvaceous woman of 23 years old with rich brown, frightening with her inner fire, eyes looking down on everyone, and blue-black hair, in which her forehead protector was lost, gathered into a short tail slightly sticking out in different directions. She, as in Naruto's memories, with one look inspired fear and respect in others. However, a mesh suit that was tight from neck to hips, complete with a dark orange miniskirt, covered only by an open brown raincoat, gave her the image of a slightly vulgar and cheeky professional girl. Because of this, many male genin, instead of their faces, lost their gaze where a small pendant rested, looking like a snake's fang, likely reminding Anko of her teacher and his betrayal. Although, knowing this woman well enough thanks to her past life, Nerin knew that this was most likely what Mitarashi was counting on when choosing such clothes for herself. Training Area 4-4, also known as the Forest of Death, she said with a malicious grin, hearing the quiet murmur of the newcomers, who clearly appreciated the name of this inhospitable place. Even Sasuke, standing next to his pensive friend, intensely trying to remember everything that should have happened to them in this damn place in the right order, noticeably tensed, staring into the cold blackness of the forest. What can we say about chalk-pale Sakura, frozen next to her beloved like a monument to herself? However, there were those who took her words quite calmly, like Naruto, not seeing anything in this place that they could not cope with. Well, or, in extreme cases, run away. A wonderful place for a picnic, don't you think? The Nine-Tails chuckled sarcastically in the blonde's head, tearing his Jinchuriki out of her sad thoughts in the most impudent manner. As in the land of waves, Kurama was in extremely high spirits because of the next portion of freedom that was certainly waiting for him right outside the fence. After all, whatever one may say, the meeting with Orochimaru, who is one of the 3 legendary shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village, promised the three of them nothing but a huge pile of problems, and without the power of the tailed beast, they would definitely have been in mortal danger. At least Sakura and Naruto. Speaking of picnics, have you noticed how hungrily that snake Sannin is looking at your vile Uchiha? He laughed ironically, hinting that the new Nin was already looking closely at the one whose body he wanted to acquire as his future vessel, being under the guise of one of the genin of the village of grass. Naruto herself saw this very well and even felt it, because the vile, sticky chakra of the one who endlessly experimented on himself was simply impossible to hide under any of the jutsu known to her. But only those who saw and felt natural energy could appreciate all this disgrace, and there weren't too many such shinobi, even among the jonin. And this, not to mention his slippery, appraising gaze aimed directly at her childhood friend. Although, according to Kurama, he had a couple of options many times better than the still weak Sasuke, in the person of his brother Itachi and their friend Shursui. Strong and young men who had developed not only their Sharingan, but also many other techniques, they were undoubtedly superior to her childhood friend in everything. However, the reason for this choice of Orochimaru was ridiculously banal. He was wary of the eyes of adults who had experienced a single loss, the Uchiha, who were already capable of imprisoning him for quite a long time in Tsukuyumi. And getting a runaway shinobi to the ANBU captain and one of the Hokage's personal guards was not so easy. What a place! Finally having died away, Sakura said quietly, briefly looking around, because, in addition to the oppressive atmosphere of the forest and the gaze of the new examiner, their team was still being glared at by some of the genin from other countries. Apparently, what happened before and during the first stage still lived too vividly in their memories, attracting a lot of unnecessary attention to Team Number 7. Although, with the appearance of Anko and this terrible place in the lives of the examinees, attention to their team became significantly less, which undoubtedly pleased both its participants and the inner demon of one of them. "Fuck him, not our Sasuke!" The kunoichi snorted at these words, specifically placing emphasis on the word "our," glancing sideways towards the strange effeminate guy from the village of grass, who had been closely studying their team for almost a quarter of an hour. And to be more precise, one cantankerous, stubborn and vindictive guy. "He won't be lost even without his body, so he'll manage." Naruto snorted angrily to herself, folding her arms on her chest, remembering that after the war, Orochimaru finally returned to the village, becoming something like a local madman, whom everyone fears, but takes for granted. However, this did not change the fact that this man is strange in all respects, if, of course, who he became could be called by this word, was a recognized genius, whom doctors and employees of the Development Bureau tried in every possible way to attract. What this meant at the moment for their team was well understood by both Naruto and her mischievous-tailed friend. You will soon find out why it is called the Forest of Death. Completely ignoring the behavior of the genin, Anko grinned frighteningly, seeing what an indelible impression this frightening place and her words made on them. "Yeah?" Finally switching the topic, Kurama drawled sarcastically, making it clear to the blonde what exactly he thought about this statement. Actually, the only thing that was truly dangerous here, in the opinion of the Nine Tails, was there was Orochimaru and a couple of other genins. The various types of giant and poisonous wild animals and plants, with the accelerated regeneration of his Jinchuriki, were nothing more than an annoying misunderstanding. The fox simply didn't care about the rest of the people. "Well, yes!" Naruto laughed cheerfully in response to him, at the same time, with a wide and too impudent smile, walking a little forward, because the stage for the next performance of Heim, of the Leaf Village was already ready. "What, they wanted to scare me?" To the thunderous applause of Kurama, neighing like a horse, and the quiet cursing of his teammates and friends, extremely arrogantly, although the word boorish would be more appropriate here, Naruto said. She knew perfectly well how vividly Mitarashi, who was already drilling into her beloved, would react to this statement. Red spoiled, the Hokage's daughter with the look of a serial maniac who has finally found a new victim. "It didn't work out. I am not afraid of anything." With an effort of will, restraining the laughter that rolled into her throat, Naruto said proudly, with her face unwavering under Anko's fierce gaze, and the quiet, sorrowful sighs of those who at least knew her nasty character. For, despite the fact that from the outside it looked like the arrogance of a spoiled person, in fact her attack was simply another prank of the blonde. "I'm proud of you," Kurama drawled mockingly, to the satisfied nod of his Jinchuriki, who was achieving exactly this effect, wanting with her subsequent performance to slightly bring down the arrogance of one insolent snake lover. "What will happen now?" The tailed one suddenly laughed wildly, noticing out of the corner of his Jinchuriki's eyes how the brunette's eyebrow twitched, seeming to have completely lost her temper. But what Naru, who laughed in agreement, heard in his words was too different from what the nine-tailed demon fox actually put into these words. "Way to go," Anko drawled feigningly innocently, skillfully hiding her irritation behind the good-natured mask of an average simpleton. "How brave we are!" Shikaku Nara literally cursed this whole day, impatiently waiting for the moment when it would end. Not only did he, from the very morning, lead the preparations for the meeting with the Kage of the Hidden Sand Village, he was present at this meeting as an assistant to the Hokage, and, at the request of Hiruzen, who had already retired too long ago, held negotiations with Race on behalf of the Kage of the Hidden Sand Village list. The Hokage's job of filling out reports on the meeting with the Kazekage for the daimyo of the Land of Fire, the elders who were absent from it, and Minato himself was dumped on him, in the literal sense of the word. Also, like the icing on this damn cake, Shikaku, instead of quickly finishing with the papers and finally going home, had to accompany his not entirely sober superiors and his student to the Forest of Death. There, where the second stage of the chunin exam was supposed to take place, in which his beloved daughter, and part-time headache for the entire village of the Hidden Leaf, participated. No, of course, the head of the Nara clan himself wanted to see his son, who had also passed the first stage of this exam, before he went to this terrible place. But there were too many very different, but very weighty, buts, because of which the three of them shouldn't have appeared in that place now. Under another sorrowful sigh, Shikaku, Minato and Kakashi, having slipped a couple of times on the wet grass, cheerfully climbed up a small hill from which a well-trodden clearing could already be seen in front of the 44 training ground, popularly nicknamed the Forest of Death. The entire space of a small spot flooded with the bright summer sun in front of a high fence, separating one of the most dangerous places in Konoha from the village, was already crowded with genin led by Anko and several of her assistants. And right in front of Midarashi, with her head held high and a wide, mocking smile, stood a miniature blonde in the brightest overalls among genin. Deep orange color. And, judging by the surrounding atmosphere, frozen like a statue of Anko herself with a frighteningly good-natured face, Naruto took up her task again. Shikaku, who had already tried several times to no avail to stop his superiors, seeing this, sighed once again, feeling that this would not end well, deciding to make one last attempt to dissuade his superiors from this rash act. In the end, they already saw Naru and, standing not far from his beloved friend, Shikamaru, like, in fact, all the other first years who were worth worrying about. "Hokage-sama, please think again. Appearing like this in front of shinobi from other countries is simply unacceptable," he said wearily, knowing full well that by the end of this exam, all countries would know that the Kage of the Hidden Leaf Village abuses alcohol. And not to mention the fact that this is against the rules of the exam itself. The head of the Nara clan drawled a little more sternly, trying to reason with the men in front of him, and then, to clarify his words, adding, "Parents cannot be present during the first and second stages of the exam." "I'm not just a parent, Shikaku, I'm Hokage." With a wide smile, Minato said confidentially, continuously watching what was happening in the clearing, to the agreement of the suspiciously silent Hatake, who had not uttered a word during their entire journey. Kakashi actually looked rather strange today, too sad for a person who has been hiding his true feelings since childhood. "Let's assume that I came to say parting words to the young shinobi." With a sly wink, he turned around and offered an excuse that had clearly been invented in advance, immediately returning his gaze to the clearing, where his daughter was talking about something with Anko. Or, more precisely, she played a staring contest with her. "And don't worry about alcohol, I'm already completely sober," Minato said enthusiastically, under the skeptical gaze of his assistant, who perfectly saw how he and Kakashi staggered when walking in from strong gusts of wind. Shikaku was about to tell him about his observations, but in the next second something happened that made not only Minato tense and Kakashi, but also the head of the Nara clan. After all, Anko, having pulled out a kunai with lightning speed, directed it directly towards Naru. A crimson-scarlet drop of blood rolled down Naruto's pale cheek, making a neat scarlet path for itself, from a thin thread of a cut left by the sharp kunai of Orochimaru's student. But she, like probably most genin, didn't even notice it. The kunoichi, standing with wide eyes, watched Minato, Kakashi and, surprisingly, Shikaku Nara appear literally out of nowhere in the middle of the clearing. Even Kurama, who usually does not shut up for a second, in such situations, pouring out his witticisms as if from a cornucopia of his witticisms, fell silent, trying to digest what he saw. What surprised everyone was not exactly that the Hokage suddenly appeared in the middle of the clearing using the technique that made him famous as the yellow lightning of Konoha. And not even that the blonde brought with him a couple more, no less famous than himself, shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village. And the fact that immediately after their enchanting appearance, Kakashi, entangled in his own legs, fell on his fifth point, Shikaku, turning towards the training ground, emptied his stomach, and Minato himself, although he remained standing on his own 2 feet, swayed suspiciously strongly. Moreover, all three were clearly not the first freshness tangled, sometimes soiled clothes, tousled hair and flushed faces. All this, naturally, led those present to rather obvious conclusions. But it seemed that even shinobi from other countries did not want to believe in these obvious conclusions. Kurama barked angrily after 30 seconds of complete silence and comprehension of what was happening. Because after which these three so unexpectedly appeared in the clearing, it perfectly made it clear to the tailed one that they were following a certain fair-haired and incredibly naive kunoichi. And this could confuse all their plans. Well, or deprive Kurama of his well-deserved moment of freedom. The only thing that slightly embarrassed the tailed one was the state in which they showed up. Are they drunk? Shuddering because of the loud roar that sounded in her head, Naruto asked in a daze the first thing that caught her eye, no longer finding a single normal excuse for the madness happening around her. Yeah, but you know, I'm more interested in what your friend's dad is doing with these 2 psychos? With a slight hint, the Ninetales laughed in response, mentally wondering whether he should directly tell him about the possible surveillance, or wait until she finally comes to her senses. Still, the drunken Minato, who practically didn't drink even at his wedding, managed to significantly surprise him. Kurama, Dad, and Kakashi. They're drunk as hell. Completely ignoring the words of the tailed one, she hysterically said, out loud, something that did not want to fit into her head. Still, in her entire life, Naruto saw these two in such a state for the first time. Minato, to her memory, has not taken a drop of alcohol into his mouth over the past 13 years. At least in front of his daughter, for sure. Hitaki, even in her past life, did not allow himself too much. No, the commander of Team Number 7 could drink several glasses of fortified wine, but to do this. In general, her father and future husband looked, to put it mildly, extremely comical. And the clearly drunk Shikaku Nara, judging by the surprised expression on Shikamaru's face, was also an unusual and rather cheerful phenomenon. She probably would have even laughed at this installation, called the strongest shinobi of Konoha, if not for the whole situation. After all, these three couldn't deliberately disgrace themselves in front of potential enemies of the Hidden Leaf Village. Dad? Still not believing her eyes, the girl asked out loud, somewhere deep inside hoping that it was all her imagination, and took a step forward, only now feeling that behind her stood the same Anko, frozen in surprise, almost close to her. Oh, Naru, my dear! The man responded joyfully, swaying once again, thereby making it clear to the blonde that these were not hallucinations, and perhaps, she really hoped for it, Minato is here for some very important reason. Like Pain's surprise attack, well, or the Fourth World War. Because if this is not so, and they just dragged themselves here completely drunk, Naru couldn't vouch for herself. Because of the Hokage's loud voice, all the people standing in the clearing shuddered and instantly came to life. Somewhere behind the kunoichi, Sakura yelped in fear and Sasuke coughed suspiciously in disappointment, as if all this time he had been expecting their examiner to be chopped into small shavings. And from the whispers gradually starting to come from all sides, it became clear that about half of the genin present in the clearing were expecting the same thing. However, the circumstances under which her father appeared in the clearing fully met the expectations of her childhood friend, because moments before that, Mitarashi threw a kunai in her direction. And if Nara had not slightly tilted her head in time, then, most likely, she would have acquired not a simple scratch on her cheek, but an extra hole in it. One thing Naruto could not understand was that although it would be more suitable here, I don't want to understand, what's the matter, still being somewhere in prostration. And here we are passing by, the Hokage began to speak haltingly, with a wide smile, looking away and ruffling his hair, but stopped short as soon as he looked at his unusually confused daughter. Because it was at that moment that the drops of blood that had accumulated there fell off Nara's chin, staining the already bright overalls with scarlet stains on the shoulder. Minato noticeably frowned, immediately ceasing to be good-natured, and somehow strangely examined the face of his almost exact copy. Or rather, a thin and deep scratch left by a razor-sharp kunai, crossing the neat stripes on her left cheek. Now you will understand what real shame means. Meanwhile, Kurama said mockingly, with obvious mockery in his voice, openly hinting at certain moments from their joint past, which his Jinchuriki for some reason considered him. No, he certainly understood that for her, who was not accustomed to the open expression of feelings, even an accidental confession was extremely embarrassing. But, unlike what was happening now, this was in no way a shame. Unless, of course, you silence your daddy, he added ironically, seeing how Minato's face was distorted with anger at the one who dared to hurt his only daughter. Yes, I know, the girl immediately snapped, knowing full well what would follow these changes in her parent, because she had already seen this a couple of times. But what should I do? She said slightly nervously, feeling the tension hanging in the clearing with her skin. It was very different from the oppressive feeling that was at the very beginning, making one tremble in front of the Hokage. The whispers and giggles of the genin gradually became quieter and disappeared, because no one wanted to fall under the hot hand of one of the 5 strongest shinobi among all the hidden villages. While Nara frantically looked around in search of someone who could help her stop this storm. Somewhere nearby stood Shikaku, pale as chalk, trying to calm down another attack. Kakashi, with the sad look of a beaten puppy, sat next to his sensei, not even trying to get to his feet and intervene in what was happening. By the way, this also worried the girl a lot, but in comparison with her father, it was not so urgent. So, how are you, in general? Minato spoke dryly, glaring at Anko, not allowing his daughter to come up with anything. Therefore, Naruto decided to use the method that saved her more than once or twice in a past life. That is, improvise, completely relying on your intuition. Daddy? Interrupting her father mid-sentence, to the approving grunt of the 9 tails, she shouted Nara to the entire clearing, and in a couple of jumps, she found herself next to him, hanging on the man like a monkey on a vine. At least she swayed on Minato in the same way. You came to see me off and give a pep talk to the young shinobi, right? Just like my first day at the academy? Really, Daddy? Naively batting her big blue eyes, she sang in one breath, emphasizing exactly what she calls him, mentally hoping that she now looks exactly as a touched girl should. Not now, honey. The blonde responded softly, contrary to his stern appearance, without paying any attention to this mini-performance, and tried to push his daughter aside in order to return to the debriefing with Anko, because of which they both almost fell, since they were letting go of their careless father. Naruto, I didn't want to. Oh, it looks like someone was ignored for the first time in their life? Kurama remarked mockingly, and was himself slightly surprised that such a trick from his friend did not work. You can't wait, fox face! The blonde snorted at this, snuggling closer to her father. I thought you came to congratulate me. Pouting, she blurted out so that only he and Hitaki, sitting next to him, could hear her. Minato, seeing how his daughter was offended, finally wavered, losing its severity, which was instantly replaced by anxiety. But you know, even so, I'm very glad that you came here, Dad. The kunoichi purred softly, finishing off the man who had already squeezed her in his strong embrace. Dad, if you don't calm down now, I'll never talk to you again. Taking advantage of the moment, Naruto hissed his threat right in his ear like an angry cat. Don't you dare disgrace us and act like the Hokage already. You are a scary woman, Naruto Namikaze, the Ninetales said, applauding, for the first time saying this phrase not as a mockery or a joke, but as the true truth. I told you. She laughed, feeling how Minato shuddered after her words, and with one last unkind glance at Mitarashi, with a barely noticeable nod, he carefully placed his child on the ground. By the way, what is it with Kakashi and Uncle Shikaku? To the nods of agreement from Shikamaru and Sasuke, she asked in a normal tone, moving on to the second problem that worried her. Shikaku just moved for the first time using the Thunder God technique. The blonde explained, turning for a moment to his chalk-pale assistant, who was being glared at by his own son with a disapproving glance. And Kakashi is like this all day, he said with a shrug, watching how worriedly his daughter looked at the one who would take her from him in the future. Naruto, hearing her father's words, squatted down and carefully placed her palm on his cheek. Hey, she called quietly, drawing attention to herself. What the hell happened to him in the last couple of hours? The Ninetales asked dryly, thereby voicing the question that was spinning in the head of his Jinchuriki. I'm fine, Naru, Hatake said, smiling tightly through his thick mask, deftly moving away from under the girl's arm, and with some difficulty rising to his feet, as if they were building a wall between her and himself. Kurama. The kunoichi squeaked pitifully, also straightening up, standing in front of a pair of men whom she loved more than life itself. She simply could not understand why Kakashi's kind and even loving gaze, even in the morning, suddenly became so distant and frightening. Why are her hands trembling so much and her heart aching if he did what he had been doing throughout her entire new life, avoiding unnecessary touches? And what a demon, she wants to scream and cry so badly. All you have to worry about now is the exam and your team, he said softly, but too coldly, under the strange gaze of Minato, who clearly expected slightly different words and behavior from his student. And then, with a slight frown, he glanced fleetingly at his other two subordinates standing right behind the blonde. Quiet, Naru, we'll figure everything out after this damn stage, Kurama said in concentration, understanding at the edge of his consciousness why this idiot could behave this way. But who or what prompted him to these absurd thoughts? Your beloved is right. Now we should focus on the exam and the snake Sannin. He drawled a little more sternly, trying to bring his girlfriend to her senses and switch her to something else. I promise that we will find out and fix everything. He roared loudly, because of which the girl, just like in childhood, shuddered. But now, finally pull yourself together, you rag, and go get your scroll of heaven, the Ninetales told her, blazing with scarlet chakra, in an almost commanding tone. Fine, Naruto responded as she exhaled, with difficulty throwing away her feelings, as she did before, in a past life, when she loved, or rather thought that she loved, Sasuke. Thank you for coming, Dad. Commander. The blonde smiled radiantly, as if nothing had happened, deliberately calling Hatake not by name, but by position. She simply couldn't say his name now. But from the outside, everything looked completely different. The copy ninja, after her words, seemed to stop breathing and, leaning on the shoulder of his increasingly surprised sensei, lowered his head, hiding his face behind his tousled hair. Minato blinked incomprehensibly, sighed heavily, and waving his hand said emotionlessly, Please continue your explanation, Anko. Chapter 37 Forest of Death. Well, Anko spoke with a kind of nervous laugh immediately after the Hokage's words, imperceptibly examining the sharply silent blonde, standing with an absent look a little to the side from everyone. Although Kakashi, who, apparently, was the reason for the changes in the behavior of the daughter of the head of their village, looked many times worse than her. He, still without raising his head, stood dejectedly not far from the thoughtful Minato, silently clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. It seemed that these two, rumored to be future spouses, had quarreled to smithereens, and this happened without the knowledge of the first daddy and the second mentor. However, Mitarashi had nothing to do with this, because now her job was not collecting information or surveillance, but playing a role the most ordinary to what extent this word was generally applicable to shinobi, examiner at the second stage of the chunin exam. Before we start the upcoming test, I have something to give you away. Casually shaking an impressive stack of sheets with a large inscription, consent. Meanwhile the woman continued to speak, quickly looking around the crowd of genin from different hidden villages, without changing her playful tone. And, as she had planned in advance, seeing questioning glances directed at her from all sides, Anko supposedly condescended to clarify her words. By signing this, you give your formal consent to participate in this test, she said with a wide smile, hearing how the shinobi immediately whispered after her words. What? A little louder than the others asked the bravest of the crowd. From all sides, a friendly buzz of agreement was immediately heard from those who were also interested in this question. That's just the Hokage's daughter, whose reaction Anko was most interested in. She still burned through the emptiness with her glassy gaze, remaining indifferent to what was happening in the clearing, as if she didn't care at all about it all. This fact, surprisingly, infuriated Mitarashi, igniting inside the student the most cunning and resourceful Sannin, who always knew everything about everyone, a curiosity unusual for her. At this stage, someone will definitely die. Smiling even wider and taking a theatrical pause, as if savoring the spoken words, Anko sang, out of the corner of her eyes watching Naruto Namake's reaction to her words. Or rather due to her complete absence. However, the blonde was not alone in her emotionlessness. Many genin, who have been carrying out tasks for many years now, also did not react in any way to this outright threat, knowing full well that such an end the fate of most shinobi. Only, unlike them, this little girl was a newcomer, having graduated from the academy only a little more than 6 months ago. One got the impression that this impudent little girl was absolutely confident that she would overcome any difficulties and, completely immersed in her thoughts, did not even listen to Mitarashi. And I don't want to answer for you, so sign. The brunette cooed with a feigned, sugary, clearly mocking grin, once again shaking the stack of sheets in her hands. And, to her surprise, Naru, who had become closest to her, finally died. The blonde, like a cat, shook her golden curls, with a wide smile, was the first to approach and take consent for herself and her team, as if she had not been standing in some kind of prostration all this time. Anko animatedly and mockingly explained the rather cruel rules of the second stage of the exam, shaking a stack of consents to participate in this event. But the words of Orochimaru's student seemed to pass by Naruto in transit. She didn't hear anything at all, as if she was deep under water, and only one single question was spinning in her head: what happened to Kakashi? Yes, the girl wanted to discard these thoughts until the end of the second stage, as she did before, pushing her feelings into the deepest place of her soul. After all, now it was much more important to cope with all the chaos that was about to happen to her team during this stage of the exam. But, for some reason, this time Naruto's endurance only lasted for a few minutes, after which she fell into a bottomless pool of worry and irrepressible anxiety. It literally drove him crazy, forcing him to replay Kakashi's behavior in his head over and over again and look for new reasons for the changes that had occurred in him. But in her past life, when Nara thought that she loved Sasuke, she could lock away her feelings. And I must say, it worked out for her, unlike this time, just great. Since absolutely no one, except Kurama and Hitaki, who consoled her when tension and pain still outweighed the scales and the blonde began to have banal hysterics, knew that Naruto Uzumaki was in love with her teammate and friend. True, if the Nine-Tails did this in his indescribable repertoire almost every night, then the copy ninja had to fight the tears of his student only 3 times. Now something completely strange was happening. The girl literally could not think about anything other than Kakashi's condition, simply fixated on it. Calm down at last. The Nine-Tails growled angrily right above her ear, tired of watching the static figure of his Jinchuriki, frozen right in the middle of his cage. By the way, her entire inner world looked to match this state, becoming somehow frozen and empty, which infuriated the tailed beast even more, which was again locked in this annoying place. The blonde shuddered in fear with her whole body and turned around in surprise at her friend, focusing her gaze on the huge yellow eye, trying to understand when she managed to find herself in her inner world. Kurama, what happened to him? Having ignored the words of the tailed one, the kunoichi plaintively asked the first thing that came to her mind. After all, in the morning everything was as usual. We agreed that we would deal with this later. The fox responded surprisingly peacefully, inhaled sharply, and lay down, running huge, even circles across the water surface. Naruto, pull yourself together, he said a little more harshly, seeing how his Jinchuriki was about to object. Now the forest of death, the snake Sannin and his friends from Sound Village are waiting for us. He already growled, trying to put this blonde's brains in their rightful place. However, from the girl's slightly offended face it immediately became clear that she had not yet decided what was more important for her now. I understand, honestly, but I can't help it, the kunoichi said quietly, sitting down opposite her, hiding her face in her hands. In my previous life, with Sasuke, it was also difficult, but I held on. The girl said slightly hysterically and, looking at her friend, added, I just can't do it, Kurama, with that vile Uchiha? Having measured his Jinchuriki with a mocking glance, the Nine-Tails laughed. Unlike her, he immediately understood what the whole point was. However, he was not going to explain anything to Naruto, believing that now she herself should realize the difference between then and now. But he simply could not refuse to mock his girlfriend. Pity, you know, is much easier to hide, the tailed one laughed, raising a sea of splashes around him. Shut up, fox face! The blonde immediately bristled like an angry cat, pointedly turning away from her friend. Sorry! Coughing suspiciously, Kurama responded a minute later, but after a moment, squinting, he spoke in a completely different tone, becoming extremely serious. But think about this, my dear Naruto. He drawled caustically, slightly frightening his Jinchuriki with such behavior. If you don't pull yourself together, you won't be able to give a worthy rebuff to Orochimaru, the fox said sharply, trying to bring the kunoichi to his senses. If you don't do this, then he can attack the Hokage, both the third and the fourth, said the tailed one, pleased with the resulting effect, because as soon as Naruto heard these words, she immediately approached, perfectly understanding what exactly he was leading to. But this was clearly not enough, so Kurama still decided to end his monologue, and we both know very well how it ended in our past life. He grinned. That's why, enough! Abruptly interrupting the Nine-Tails, Naru shouted, not wanting to even think about what he wanted to tell her, since this had been her worst nightmare since childhood. She simply would not have survived Minato's death. Not now, when the girl had time to live with her loving father, get to know him and love not only the memory, but also the person who was hiding behind it. I understood you. More sharply than she wanted, she continued, full of determination, getting to her feet so that within a moment she could smile widely in the outside world. Naruto, turning the signed consent in her hands, listened with half an ear to Midarashi's words about the forest of death without much interest, because she already knew firsthand what awaited them behind this high fence. Therefore, she simply ignored most of Anko's words, spending her time with much greater benefit. The girl tried once again to properly think through and analyze the upcoming battle with Orochimaru, wanting to avoid the consequences that awaited their team in a past life. Well, or minimize them. However, from time to time thoughts about Kakashi still slipped into her head. But, remembering Kurama's cruel words, the kunoichi drove them away with an effort of will, because there was nothing that was more important to her than her father. Minato was the only one for whom Naru could sacrifice even her principles and go against the whole world alone. However, now was not the time or place to think about all this, so, hey, this is who you should learn from. Interrupting the incoherent stream of thoughts of his Jinchuriki, Kurama laughed contentedly, watching with her eyes as Anko told the examinees about what exactly would await them during their stay in the Forest of Death. This woman did not scare the genin like Marino, trying to break and crush them through psychological pressure. She simply and calmly explained to them the rules of this stage of the exam, while not being at all interested in what would happen to them in the near future. And this, by the way, worked no worse than Ibiki's cunning tricks. This means that half of the teams will definitely fail. Meanwhile, Sakura said tensely, but rather collectedly, in the affirmative, raising her voice for the first time since the moment they found themselves in this damn clearing. Naru, who was already about to answer Kurama with some kind of hairpin, opened her eyes wide and, raising an eyebrow in surprise, turned to her teammate. Whatever one may say, it was extremely unusual to hear such a tone from her in this situation, because in her past life Haruno was able to become truly brave and decisive only after the chunin exam. Did you hear that? Completely ignoring Midarashi's answer, Naruto asked enthusiastically, mentally checking one of a million boxes in her grand plan for a new life. Yeah, Kurama sourly agreed with her, not seeing anything interesting in the rather logical words of this pink-haired burden. And one more rule, Anko said sternly, raising her voice slightly so that absolutely all the genin present in the clearing could hear her. Looking at the scrolls before you reach the tower is prohibited. What will happen if we look into them? Immediately, Naru inquired amidst Kurama's wild laughter, literally perking up after the actions of her future best friend. A bird in the face of Iriko will fly out and knock on everyone's pumpkins. The fox couldn't resist, slipping into outright hysteria. Let it be a surprise for those who decide. Playfully Midarashi confided, winking at the blonde. Then she, turning on her heels, blew a kiss to the gloomy Hokage and smiled sweetly at a couple of his escorts, who, in the time that had passed since their spectacular appearance, had managed to slightly come to their senses and sober up. Chunin are often trusted with secret information. Turning over her shoulder at the genin who froze in surprise gophers, she laughed and immediately added harshly, "We'll check your reliability at the same time. Look at the way she looked at your daddy." The Nine-Tails chuckled with sarcasm and obvious, not entirely decent overtones, which made Naruto literally shudder. "No, Kurama! Not this crazy woman!" the blonde said extremely categorically to the mocking laugh of her tailed friend. However, Kurama was only partly joking, because the uncontrollable character of Anko Midarashi vaguely reminded him of the explosive, unpredictable and incredibly bright Kushina with her eternal supply of enthusiasm and inexhaustible energy. This is all. Meanwhile, the brunette continued to speak, slowly approaching the table that stood not far from one of the 44 checkpoints to the 44th training site. And now the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village will give his farewell speech. Minato Namikaze. Stopping next to her subordinate, sitting at an impressive table, behind which a tent rose, she grinned, and then, noticing the confusion on the blonde's face, she added caustically, "Isn't that what he came here for?" "Yes, of course, for this, Anko." Having collected himself, Minato said with a promising smile, glaring at this abnormal woman who decided to pull the tiger's whiskers. He carefully removed the hand of Kakashi, who seemed to have already turned into a statue of himself, gesturing for Shikaku to take his place, and walked slightly forward. Then the blonde slowly brushed himself off and ruffled his sunny hair, not covered by his usual hat with the kanji, kage, making himself look more like one of the genin. All this time, the eyes of everyone present in the clearing were literally glued to the relaxed and completely self-confident man. And only Naruto and Kurama knew that under this mask of ideal there was a very ordinary person, frantically coming up with his speech, angry as hell. "So, first I would like to say, I even feel a little sorry for him." Listening to his speech, the Nine-Tails chuckled ironically, literally pulling out his Jinchuriki right on the approach to the next attack of hysteria. "It's my own fault," the girl snorted in response. "There's no point in taking care of me like I'm a little girl." And the last parting words. Minato's loud but soft voice rang out throughout the clearing. "Be careful in this place," he said with a wide smile, his eyes constantly following his small copy, which he would not see for the next 5 days. "Now come to this table, give consent, receive your scrolls of heaven or earth, and choose a gate to start," Anko announced loudly, immediately after the Hokage's words, knocking on the wooden tabletop to attract the attention of the excited genin. "In 30 minutes the second stage of the chunin exam will begin. Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura stood near gate number 12 right behind one of Anko's subordinates, who, on her command, was supposed to open the entrance to the Forest of Death for them. In the past little less than half an hour, they only managed to exchange their consents for a scroll, choose a gate by lot and get to it. However, discussing plans and strategy among your future enemies would not be the best idea. And they will have more than enough time for all this ahead. Ready? The nine-tailed man asked seriously, which was completely out of character for him, starting to slowly release his scarlet chakra so that at the right moment it would leak through the seal he had broken in the land of waves. The second stage of the chunin exam has begun. Anko's piercing voice was heard throughout the area, announcing the start of the countdown of 120 hours. During these 5 days, the teams had to get the second scroll, survive and reach the central tower, located approximately 10 kilometers from each of the gates. Yes. The kunoichi answered her tailed tenant at the same time as Mitarashi, watching as the gates to the 44th training base swung open in front of them. Okay. Stretching her fist forward, Naruto shouted as she went ahead of her team. Let's go! The blonde said and was the first to rush forward, knowing full well that her two teammates would follow her. But already at the edge of the forest, Naruto unexpectedly slowed down and began to walk quickly, knowing well that they still wouldn't go far, and they would still need strength. Do we have a plan of action? Having caught up with his childhood friend, Sasuke asked seriously, letting the girl know that she was now the head of strategy in their team. The one who spent her entire past life sending it all to hell, acting on bare instincts. If someone had told her this 10 years ago, Nara would have had a lot of fun. Now she had no time to laugh, because hell awaited them ahead. I hope so, because I feel a little uneasy here, Sakura responded, clasping her arms around her shoulders, just like the brunette, catching up with Naruto, making the tailed trickster who had settled in the kunoichi's head whistle with her words. Congratulations! The Nine Tails laughed mockingly, drawing an analogy with her past life, where absolutely everyone considered her a real idiot. Shut up, Kurama! The girl growled to herself, suddenly slowing down due to the loud human scream that echoed throughout the forest. Yes, she responded laconically, as if she had not heard anything, carefully looking around. They were in a small area surrounded on all sides by dense forest. Not a good position for an ambush. It's just that whoever team number 7 will have to meet with is unlikely to fall into their trap, so it was better for them to be in an open space that was clearly visible from all sides. Was that a man screaming? Sakura asked quietly, seeing that her comrades apparently decided to ignore this fact. Naruto, not paying any attention to her words, sat straight down on the ground and, closing her eyes, concentrated on the natural energy that literally envelopes this entire place and its inhabitants. Most likely, someone has already begun to act, Sasuke responded warily, examining the perimeter, watching his, surprisingly, absolutely calm and collected friend out of the corner of his eyes. Naruto, what are you? He began to ask a question, but stopped short when the blonde suddenly opened her bright blue eyes and looked somewhere through him, into the darkness of the forest. What a curious little Uchiha! Kurama said caustically, gradually increasing the flow of his chakra, which began to slowly seep through Minato's seal, until it imperceptibly envelopes the Jinchuriki's aura. Southwest, 3 meters, on a tree branch, Naruto said, turning her sharp gaze with slightly elongated pupils on Sasuke. Throw a couple of kunai at that place, she said a little louder, as if ordering, noticing the slight confusion on the guy's face. Kurama, stop and mind your own business, otherwise you'll spend the whole 5 days in my cage. The girl barked to herself in a commanding tone, watching as Sasuke fulfilled her request with an incredulous look. However, after the muffled cry and the man literally falling from that branch, the skepticism on his face decreased significantly. How did you know, children? Shouted the genin from the hidden mist village, rising on trembling legs. But Sasuke and Sakura themselves did not know the answer to this question, turning helpless glances from the stranger, who was holding the bleeding wounds on his side with his hand, to the blonde, sitting with a serious look behind them in the lotus position. Have they always been such idiots? The Ninetales inquired socially, finding a lot of humor in this completely not funny situation. Whatever one may say, the Uchiha and this pink-haired girl should have known that Naruto was an excellent censor. At least she definitely didn't hide this during the mission in the Land of Waves. Yes, even before the first stage of the exam, when she discovered Tenten and Niji with them. I know it's cruel, but there's no choice. So maybe you'd better tie him up? Laughing nervously because of the words of the tailed one, she told Naruto, trying not to go into details, because not so far from their spot she felt the familiar vile, sticky chakra of Orochimaru. And this meant that they had practically no time left for all these lyrics. Shut up already, your exit is coming soon, Kurama, the girl said nervously, closing her eyes again, only this time gathering her strength. I will do, Sasuke nodded, gesturing that he did not need help in fulfilling his girlfriend's latest request. Don't be afraid, I know my stuff. Immediately after the brunette's words, the nine-tailed man laughed in anticipation at the words of his vessel, causing a slight half-smile on the face of the meditating girl. What's happening? Sakura asked quite seriously when the brunette walked a fairly large distance. What? Naruto and Kurama asked almost in unison. The only difference was that the girl said it out loud, while the tailed man's voice was heard only in her head. The blonde blinked in surprise, trying to understand what she was asked, and looked at the girl in confusion. Haruno was serious and even slightly cold, as if, like her, she knew more than everyone around her. Sakura, what are you talking about? The blonde asked with a nervous laugh, actually afraid and wanting to know her answer. Hey, she couldn't hear us with your blink, could she? Kurama chuckled, unlike his Jinchuriki, knowing full well that she was thinking about a completely incredible option. Naruto intuitively grabbed her pendant, waiting for an answer from Haruno, who seemed to be deep in thought about something. No! The kunoichi immediately snapped, calming down slightly. Even if she were an Uzumaki, this simply could not happen, because this is my own modification. She explained more for herself than for the tailed one. Turning towards Sasuke, the pink-haired girl finally spoke in a quiet and hesitant voice, as if it wasn't her who had spoken before. Did something happen between you and Kakashi-sensei? The girl asked timidly, looking again at the blonde with some sympathy. Naruto blinked stupidly, trying to comprehend Haruno's question, in which, as it turned out, there was nothing but participation. And although what she wanted to hide from everyone turned out to be public property, and it was slightly depressing, the care on the part of her friends spread warmth throughout her heart, giving Naruto a happiness that was almost forgotten. It gives! Kurama drawled in surprise to the silent consent of his Jinchuriki. However, maybe she's worried about her own skin. He immediately grinned, once again spoiling the whole atmosphere. Although, it's probably none of my business, mistaking the blonde's silence for a reluctance to talk to her about such topics, the pink-haired girl quickly babbled. Sorry, Naruto, yes, she said nervously, calling her for the first time since they had known each other in a way that only friends and family did. Maybe just Naru. The girl smiled and waved her hand. No, you're right, Sakura, ruffling the hair on the back of his head, while making a mental note to himself. Gather them in a bun. The blonde quietly responded. Kakashi and I really, she spoke, but at the end of the sentence she hesitated, not knowing what had happened to Hitaki. To be honest, I don't know at all what happened. The kunoichi honestly admitted with a stupid, slightly sad smile, lowering her head. But don't worry, it won't interfere with me during this part of the exam, she added quietly, nevertheless deciding to check the words of the Ninetales. Hey! Sakura snorted slightly offendedly, but immediately softened, exhaled and continued, Naru, don't worry. Already the pink-haired girl said warmly, sitting down next to the blonde. Your relationship with Sensei. It's like that. I don't know how to put it correctly, she smiled, hugging her interlocutor by the shoulders. Everyone who knows our Sensei and you even a little sees that you are in love with each other. Haruno whispered quietly. Therefore, I am sure that everything is fine with you, Sakura. Naruto, what are you even doing? chuckled from behind in a suspiciously familiar Uchiha tone. The girls simultaneously shuddered and, as if scalded, jumped away from each other at a decent distance. But instead of the usual laughter, a menacing roar was heard in Nara's head, notifying her of upcoming problems. Orochimaru! The kunoichi spat out, feeling the same as her tailed beast. Sakura, don't go near him! The girl shouted, simultaneously trying to concentrate to understand where the real Sasuke was. I know myself, the pink-haired girl responded, taking a stance. Excellent, you have revealed me. The brunette laughed with an unpleasant hissing laugh, completely changing his manner of conversation and behavior. How did you know I was a fake? He asked curiously, and then everything around the guy was covered in dense white smoke. Sasuke never called Naru by his full name. Sakura shouted back to him, barely nodding to the blonde. Well done, pink-haired, that snake! Kurama growled, sensing imminent freedom. And also your chakra, Naruto added with a wince, mockingly, as she began to put the basis of her plan into action. I'll be honest, I've never seen anything more disgusting in my life. She drawled ironically as the smoke began to gradually dissipate, revealing to the girls one of the hidden Sound Village genin in a straw hat. Looks like it's going to be even more fun than I thought. The man grinned irritably, taking off his headdress. Looks like the fun has begun. Anko grinned, hearing the first screams coming distantly from the forest of death, catching the Hokage's dissatisfied, literally searing gaze. Mitarashi, Minato said dryly, taking a few steps towards the woman. Who gave you the right to touch my daughter? He literally spat in her face. Oh, okay, I was just joking, the brunette retorted, involuntarily taking a couple of steps back. However, it wasn't Minato's gaze that scared her. Anko was frightened by the man who stood like a dark shadow right behind him, promising her a slow and painful death. Hokage-sama, I understand everything, but now is not the time or place. The village is full of strangers. At his own peril and risk, Shikaku inserted himself into the conversation, rightfully putting this day in first place in the ranking of the worst days of his life. You are right, the head of the village said sharply, turning his back to the frozen woman. But remember, I warned you, Anko, Chapter 38, Orochimaru. Sasuke, with a frowning look, was dragging behind him an unconscious genin from the hidden mist village, whom he, on Naruto's tip, had recently wounded. A man, probably twice his age, left a crimson trail of blood behind him, which in the dim light of the ancient forest seemed almost black. The genin somehow wheezed and clearly did not intend to come to his senses any time soon. Actually, it was precisely because of the severe bleeding and fainting that the Uchiha decided to drag the enemy away from the clearing where his team settled. After all, the smell of fresh, still living blood would inevitably attract many of the local inhabitants to the place of its gathering, and for some reason his girlfriend and part-time commander of their small detachment decided to set up camp in this absolutely unsuitable place for him. Whatever one may say, the clearing, open on all sides, was completely unsuitable for a normal ambush, a surprise attack or any kind of decent defense, making the three simply an ideal target for the other teams. However, Sasuke was not thinking about this at all, sincerely believing that Naru knew what he was doing. And not even about the fact that he, quite possibly, inflicted a mortal wound on someone for the first time. All the guy's thoughts for more than an hour were occupied by what happened this morning, right before the first stage of the exam. The younger Uchiha had noticed for quite some time that he was completely unable to control his anger. And this, based on the words of his brother, could result in very big problems, interfering with his development as a shinobi. In general, Sasuke himself understood this perfectly well, because, according to the same Itachi, only spoken 5 years earlier, control and management of chakra were closely related to the control of one's own emotions. Simply put, the one who quickly loses his temper also quickly uses up his chakra and losing his life. And today the youngest Uchiha felt this very well in his own skin. Starting up from a half-turn, he in the blink of an eye used up about a third of all his chakra, simply releasing it. Although, speaking quite frankly, it was not only this fact that made him think. Naru immediately quelled all his ardor with one touch, acting on her friend like a tub of cold water. She, as always, calmly assessed the situation and made the only right decision at that moment. This composure, prudence, and intelligence of his friend incredibly admired the guy from childhood. But at the same time, Sasuke was terribly angry, because even from childhood, somewhere very deep inside his heart, he envied Naruto, who absolutely always and in everything was many times better than him. The blonde seemed to know in advance how it would be correct and much easier to perform this or that exercise or jutsu, causing admiration in the eyes of the elders. When did the younger Uchiha realize that in the future his childhood friend could cause a stop in the development of the jutsu of his clan, one of the three great Digitsu Sharingan, which in the blink of an eye would finally allow not only to catch up with her, but also to overtake her? This tiny black speck turned into a large black blot. For she, developing herself, unknowingly put a spoke in his wheels, yet the guy would never have been able to consciously harm Naru in his life. Sasuke's attachment to this absurd, uncontrollable, simply unrealistic girl, who had been next to him since childhood, grew into something akin to addiction. Not so quickly, gradually and unconsciously. For the guy, the need for such a dear Naruto next to him became something self-evident. His childhood friend became like air to him, almost invisible in everyday life and at the same time literally necessary. It was at that moment that he realized that Naruto Namikaze had long become dearer to him than the revival of the clan, revenge, all of Konoha with its damned inhabitants, and even his own life. After all, she was like his own sister. Or rather, he thought so until recently. Sasuke finally understood why his body had been reacting in some strange way to his girlfriend's proximity lately. After all, it was by no means a matter of a sharp change in mood and complaisance, because Itachi, Shursui, Kakashi, and even Minato influenced him in stressful situations in exactly the same way. The guy, for the last 6 months, although, honestly, he has been doing this almost his entire life, who, in addition to his loved ones, ignored everyone and everything, surprisingly liked her hugs and cuddling too much. He noticed this oddity long before their mission in the Land of Waves. During it, Sasuke only once again made sure of this. When Naru, under the influence of emotions, literally squeezed her friend, who helped her win the battle with the chunin from the village of Mist, in a ring of hands, he was literally stunned. Only then the guy did not pay special attention to these strange feelings, considering that such things were in the order of things for fairly close friends. When today the blonde kissed him weightlessly, as she had done more than once in their childhood, when he gave her toys and sweets, Sasuke literally fell into a stupor from the burning warmth that filled his entire body. He unexpectedly felt his heart freeze for a moment in his chest, and then beat peacefully, as if there was no anger, a greedy thirst for battle and an attempt to prove to everyone around him how strong he was, giving him a warm, kind of homely peace. Strange, completely wrong, irrational feelings for him, which the guy absolutely did not want to feel towards his named sister. He valued his friendship with Naru too much and respected Kakashi-sensei too much to interfere in their long-standing love with his own incomprehensible feelings. But still, the younger Uchiha was so eager to feel something like that at least once more, passionately wanting peace. Sasuke! A loud, furious cry from the thin and ringing voice of his second teammate suddenly rang out throughout the entire area. The guy, so brazenly torn out of his thoughts, froze and, finally releasing his already lifeless burden from his hands, looked around slightly absent-mindedly in search of the incredibly annoying troublemaker and the possible reason for the imminent attack. Sakura, all red, ran to him in tears, trying to tell him something as she went through her completely lost breathing. "You urgently need to return to Naruto." Finally stopping, she shouted loudly in one breath, finally giving out something coherent. "Sasuke, Naru, she is alone fighting a strong enemy." The pink-haired girl continued hysterically, finding herself next to the guy, dumbfounded by the realization of the words she had uttered. Naruto looked with great relief at the quickly retreating back of her best friend in the future, who, after a short bickering, still left her alone with the genin from the village of grass. Whatever one may say, Sakura could do little to help her now. Both girls understood this well. This is probably why the most stubborn of her acquaintances so quickly agreed with her proposal. However, Sasuke was not her help in the battle with Orochimaru either. Only one blonde knew about this, so she acted as, in her opinion, it was easiest way. She brought two of her teammates to battle with giant snakes, while she, alone, dealt with their dear owner. I remember that in a past life she overcame one of these without any problems. However, at first this viper ate her alive, but still. In general, unlike herself, Naruto was confident in Sasuke and Sakura, even taking into account the fact that in that direction, not one creature was felt, but three. And the girl didn't want to demonstrate her tailed mode to anyone yet. Apart from Orochimaru, of course, who looked at the running girl with a wide and somehow too pleased smile, without making even a tiny attempt to stop her. Good afternoon, beautiful Heim of the Hidden Leaf Village. When Sakura disappeared from their field of vision, hiding in the same direction where Sasuke had recently gone, the man said rather politely, bowing his head slightly. It's just that his whole appearance oozed sarcasm and undisguised mockery embedded in this extremely respectful greeting. Naru, be as careful as possible with him. Sensing in this shinobi a clear threat to his Jinchuriki, without his usual antics and irony, Kurama responded extremely warily. Until that moment he had been concentrating on releasing his chakra little by little through the broken seal of Hak no Fuin Shiki. I know! The blonde responded quietly, feeling how her whole body was gradually starting to burn, as if on fire. This time, the scarlet chakra, spreading over her tenketsu and kirikue, no longer caused the girl such burning pain, it only burned, filling the Baida vessel with a small part of its unbridled power and hatred for all living things. To some extent, it was only thanks to these sensations that Naruto still remained collected, because the upcoming battle scared her very much. That time they managed to survive solely because of luck. Luck and the good mood of their enemy, who, having received his from Sasuke, decided not to finish off the children he had already crippled. It's very nice to meet you, the legendary Leaf Sannin, who betrayed his village, comrades and teacher. The blonde exhaled boldly, shaking her still flowing hair, with a mockery, trying to act as casually and brazenly as possible. Still, she was no match for this man, at least until she completely removed the seal from Kurama's cell. Now she prayed that Orochimaru would begin to act as he and Kurama had planned. By the way, apparently the blonde was getting better and better at playing the impudent bitch. For the man in front of her first blinked in surprise, fully realizing her words and the fact that he, in fact, had been discovered and insulted. Then he took a closer look at his strange interlocutor, as if trying to look right inside her and understand what was wrong with this crazy teenager. After all, if she knew who was standing in front of her, then, in theory, unless, of course, she was a complete idiot, this girl should have run away from here. The blonde in front of him was not impudent, yes, arrogant undoubtedly, spoiled. This was clear even before the start of the first stage of the exam. And if this was so, then this 13-year-old girl had something to oppose to him, the legendary Sannin, who had long ago reached the level of the Kage themselves in strength. And the awareness of this fact simultaneously strained and irritated the man. However, it suddenly dawned on the Sannin that there was another, more down-to-earth option that easily explained the madness happening around, where foolish children dared the strongest. This guess revealed everything, making a bunch of gaps clear and understandable, from the disclosure of his identity to the overly impudent behavior of the Hokage's daughter. Orochimaru frowned slightly, once again examining the girl in front of him from head to toe, looking for confirmation or refutation of his thoughts. The blonde, meanwhile, raised a thin eyebrow in confusion, folded her hands on her chest, unconsciously standing in one expressive pose, which she had once, back in her past life, seen from her mentor. I remember Jiraiya, to whom it belonged, always used it when he explained something difficult to her or reprimanded her. But most often he got into it when he was terribly dissatisfied with something. Orochimaru, grunting barely audibly, finally grinned at something, as if he understood Naruto's secret, introducing the girl into even greater confusion with his actions. It seems to me, or did you really break the snake, Sannin? The Nine-Tails laughed nervously, perfectly aware of his and Neru's losing position and hoping that the person in front of them would not break into an attack right now. For at the moment, in an open battle, they could not oppose anything to the strength and skills of one of the 3 legendary Sannins of the Hidden Leaf Village, even with their imperfect tailed cover. Therefore, the only real chance for them to attack was the element of surprise, since Orochimaru most likely did not know that the Hokage's daughter was a Jinchuriki of the 9 tails, capable of controlling a particle of the power of her bijou. Although the last fact was a surprise even for her father, which now played into their hands, because the fact that she was a vessel of the Tailed One was a relative mystery. So, the main detail of their plan was that Orochimaru should not attack first. And there were 2 good reasons for this: not wanting to reveal their cards ahead of schedule. He and Naruto did not want to organize a light show that could attract absolutely all the exam participants and the top of Konoha. And the second, which was a secret even for the Kunoichi herself, when pouring in his chakra, Kurama acted extremely carefully this time, not wanting to cause unnecessary pain to his vessel. "Who are you really?" the man hissed warily and curiously, his voice reminiscent of one of his favorite snakes, interrupting the blonde who was already ready to answer something smart to his bijou. At the same time, he did not take his inquisitive gaze off her, in all likelihood deciding that this was not the Hokage's daughter. At least, only one person could behave so familiarly with him without fear of becoming a laboratory rat on his table. After his words, the girl literally choked on air, barely holding back a cough due to the harsh laughter that shook his inner world. However, after a couple of moments, Naruto herself regretted that she could not support her old friend. For the Sannin, lolling out his long snake tongue, continued to speak, considering her strange reaction to be confirmation of his words. "You simply cannot really be Naruto Namikaze, but I want to give you credit, Jiraiya. This time you have outdone yourself. You're probably confusing me with my godfather." Interrupting the man mid-sentence, the girl said in the most impudent way with a wide sarcastic smile to the hysterical giggles of her bijou, who appreciated the face of this snake, who had clearly confused something with his conclusions. "Shut up and finish your work already." Tired of stalling for time, she angrily hissed to herself like a cat, feeling how the flow of Kurama's chakra flowing into her tenketsu was slowly decreasing. "You're still a scary woman, Naruto!" The fox grinned approvingly, resuming the flow of his chakra to the stern chuckle of his friend. "A little more, and the battle will no longer be needed," he added mockingly, disappearing into the depths of her subconscious. "By the way, thank you for letting Sakura go, Orochimaru." Without allowing the Sannin to open her mouth, this time Naruto continued to speak with an absolutely sincere smile. "By the way, between you and me, your language is just—" Covering her mouth with her hand, supposedly demonstrating disgust, hiding a laughing smile, she snorted and immediately added, finishing off, "Disgusting! How are you?" The man exploded with righteous anger, feeling his patience overflowing and his pride cracking, giving vent to his rage, because he had been overtaken and humiliated by some overly impudent little girl. "I noticed this even before this stage began." Again interrupting her interlocutor, the girl slowly spoke in a faintly thoughtful tone, slowly beginning to close the distance between them. She felt Kurama's energy filling her body, felt her fangs stretch, her claws lengthen, and all her senses sharpen. The Kunoichi vaguely remembered these sensations. Then, in the land of waves, through the veil of burning heat, pain and rage, she remembered how her bones and joints were broken and stretched, becoming a deadly weapon. Now everything was different. There was heat, but it only made her blood hot. There was anger, but only towards someone who could harm her friend. There was no pain at all. There was only discomfort and something so insignificant that I couldn't even dare to call it real pain. "Thank you, Kurama," the Kunoichi drawled to herself, understanding who exactly should be thanked for this. "Tell me, is this perhaps some kind of disease?" the blonde exclaimed with fake interest, hiding her changed hands behind her back, and her reddened eyes with an elongated pupil behind her long blonde bangs, her skin feeling the bloodlust emanating from the Sannin. "Now!" The 9 tails growled in her inner world, already releasing the flow of his chakra through the seal without restrictions. The kunoichi jumped up and without hesitation rushed with a kunai at Orochimaru, who froze in surprise in place with an extremely surprised look. At the same moment, the heat that engulfed Naruto's body intensified significantly, burning her skin to redness, and her entire body was enveloped in scarlet, suppressive chakra, forming the cover of a tailed beast. Anko sat with a calm soul in the clearing at the table where quite recently they had gathered the consent of the genin, eating dango and washing it down with juice, pleasantly squinting in the warm summer sun. Everything went according to her clear plan, besides the Hokage's prank and the acquired enemy in the form of a former ANBU captain, of course, but these were trifles, because she didn't visit the village very often. And she planned to establish relations with the Hokage's daughter Mitarashi, who was very interesting. She was a person. A woman would be very happy to take this daring girl as her student, because this Naruto reminded her too much of herself as a child, only with great potential. And it would be quite nice to take revenge on the main cause of the troubles. Mitarashi did not remember her not entirely pedagogical actions towards the genin, sincerely believing that the impudence of this amusing girl was to blame for everything. Well, now, perhaps, we can go to the tower, Anko said with a satisfied look, getting up from her place, and with a wide grin. Without making much effort, she threw a skewer from the last 3 dango balls into the trunk of a nearby tree. In the end, the strongest will reach her in about a day. She chuckled into the void, clearly unhappy that she would have to deal with children again. The projectile, meanwhile, landed exactly on target, ending with a leaf symbol made of the exact same skewers thrown by the kunoichi earlier. The drawing is completed. She grinned, looking meticulously at her creation. Suddenly, one of the subordinates assigned to her for the duration of the exam appeared behind her from a puff of white smoke. "Anko-sama, we're in trouble!" he said excitedly, falling on one knee in front of her. "What's happened?" the kunoichi lazily asked, already tired of jumping up and running somewhere because of the serious problems that happened in Konoha almost every hour on the eve of the exam. Needless to say, these same problems, in Mitarashi's opinion, weren't worth a damn. Therefore, skepticism towards them had already become the most common thing for a kunoichi, since she, as one of the 3 examiners, had to keep an eye on everything as the organizer of this event. "Corpses." The man spoke somehow hesitantly, continuing to stand on one knee. 3 corpses. Spreading his hands, he said more confidently, seeing the interest on the face of his superiors. "Corpses?" Mitarashi asked incomprehensibly, finally stopping chewing and concentrating on her subordinate. "And they are kinda strange." The chunin in front of her nodded affirmatively. "Your presence is required," he exclaimed hotly, finally rising to his feet. Anko nodded in agreement, staring thoughtfully at the leaf symbols she had created using dango sticks. "Then follow me," the man immediately responded, rushing off in the opposite direction from the 44 training ground. All the way to his destination, Mitarashi had a strange feeling that the situation was wrong. It seemed to her that she was missing something in all this, simply turning a deaf ear to something that should have alerted her long ago. But just what? The scene of the incident, as it turned out, was at the very edge of the village, right behind the old quarter of the Uchiha clan, near a dilapidated temple. The corpses were located exactly on the border of an empty sanctuary, abandoned by everyone long before the fall of the Uchiha clan. A quiet, inconspicuous place, devoid of unnecessary eyes and ears. It was simply perfect for settling scores, revenge, and simply quenching the thirst for blood. But only a resident of Konoha could know about this, and one who lived even before the incident with the Ninetales, after which this area was moved outside the village. Frowning from the realization of this fact, Anko hastily walked closer to the scene, but 30 centimeters from the corpses she froze in silent horror. "We checked their documents and personal belongings." Either not noticing or not paying attention to the expression of horror on Mitarashi's face, Kotetsu, one of the pair of shinobi who were at the scene before, immediately spoke. "It looks like these are genin from the Hidden Grass Village," he continued to report, while the second, Izumo, continued to carefully examine the place that the 2 had already thoroughly explored. "They came to take the exam, but," hesitating slightly, He cleared his throat and continued his report. As you can see, they don't have faces. Izumo spoke for his partner, finally finishing the final inspection of the crime scene. None at all, as if the skin had melted, the man said, while Anko sharply recoiled from the corpses, as if they could rise from the dead and rush at her, wanting eat. The woman recognized the shinobi's jutsu that committed this atrocity. Her former teacher, who betrayed his teacher, abandoned the village and left his student to the mercy of fate, is one of the most terrible people Anko has ever known in her entire life. Just what did he need in this damn exam, in a village where one of the highest rewards on the current list was assigned for his head? Show me photographs of these three. Finally, having died away, Mitarashi fussily shouted, extending her hand to her temporary subordinates. There is, they responded in unison, handing over 3 personal cards with information about the participant in the chunin exam. The woman impatiently grabbed them and, just glancing at the documents, turned sharply towards a pair of chunin. Go to Hokage-sama immediately, she barked, frantically thinking about where to start searching for her former teacher. Several A and BU captains must report to the Forest of Death immediately, she continued to shout, turning to her subordinates with a gloomy, determined face. I'm going there immediately. Sakura didn't understand how this could even happen, because just recently everything was still relatively good, but now Naruto was fighting an enemy that was clearly superior to her in strength, otherwise why would she ask her to bring Sasuke? And they, as in a bad comedy, were stuck some kilometer away from her, unable to help. 3 simply hefty snakes appeared in front of them literally from the void, blocking the path to the place where their friend was fighting. And judging by the expression on the younger Uchiha's face, he was ready to gnaw his way through this barrier with his teeth in order to get to Naruto. However, Sakura herself was not far off, because this annoying blonde never asked for help just like that. In the time that has passed since graduation, Haruno has already gotten to know her quite well, and so, this girl always kept everything to herself, trying to solve not only her own problems, but also those of those around her, exclusively on her own. Naru was a very strong shinobi and a good person, whom Sakura, while studying at the academy, undeservedly bullied. Sakura, tail! Sasuke shouted, dodging the attack of one of the snakes. The pink-haired girl shuddered, remembering that she herself was in mortal danger, and quickly looking around, jumped to the side, a moment before the blow with her massive tail, going to the side. A second later, a guy landed next to her, catching his breath, having managed to gouge out one of the snake's eyes with a flurry of kunai. We need to deal with them as quickly as possible, he said dispassionately, glancing briefly at his teammate and again focusing on the space around them. One of the reptiles, bleeding, hit its head against a tree trunk with its last breath, no longer able to orient itself normally. The other 2. They were intertwined in a ball, looking menacingly at the pair of small people in front of them. At the same moment, from the side of the clearing where Naruto remained, evil chakra flared furiously and a drawn-out male roar was heard, followed by a couple more smaller splashes. A huge dusty cloud with a crumble of wood chips soared into the sky, and a girl's bone-piercing scream was heard. Everything inside Sakura went cold with horror and the realization that it was she who left Nara alone in that damn clearing. And then a large fireball burst out from right behind Haruno. The girl had already seen the same one, only much smaller, during their survival training performed by Sasuke. The snakes, engulfed in flames, hissed and began to wriggle, trying to extinguish the fire that was burning their scales, but it was too strong. As if in slow motion, Sakura turned to the guy, as if not believing that it was he who did this. You're wearing the left one, the brunette said without any hesitation, having finished blowing fire out of himself, and then, without waiting for an answer, he took off. The pink-haired girl, swallowing, turned around and, armed with a kunai, rushed to attack after him, straight at the still blazing snakes.